Here in the Northern Rockies, dark winter months are outlasted in basements, dens, and nooks where kindred souls gather together to share intel, swap fly patterns, and relive the memories from seasons past. This gathering spot, known locally as the February Room, is the inspiration for this podcast. No matter the season, the door is always open to those with a fly fishing story to tell. Brought to you by CD Fishing USA, the North American distributor for composite development fly rods and accessories. 40 years of Kiwi ingenuity and graphite technology now available at cd-fishing.us or your local CD USA dealer. Follow us on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook. And remember to go fishing. Here's your host, the Carnops, and this is the February Room.
My first job upon moving to Montana in 2005 was in the fishing department of the then newly established Sportsman's Warehouse. This store attracted a hodgepodge of outdoor-oriented folks, and many of them went on to do some really cool things. Some of them still work there, and several of them became lifelong friends. I first met my guest today during his brief stint at the fishing department of Sportsman's Warehouse. And he went on to establish a very successful outfitting business in his home state of Alaska. I'm looking forward to reconnecting. Mark Wackler, welcome to the February Room.
Hey, thanks, Justin. It's good to hear your voice again, and it's good to be here.
Yeah, man, it's cool. You know, love it or hate it, social media does have some benefits. And, I kept in touch with what you've done via like Facebook and Instagram and stuff. And fortuitously, we reconnected here. So this is good, man. I'm excited to chat with you. And before we dive into your background and your business and your advocacy for fish, do you have a fishing story you can share with us today?
When I was thinking about this, I was like, I started realizing I really kind of categorize my fishing memories into different, little boxes. And I have like my memories from when I was a kid. And then I have memories from my guiding career. I have memories, like buddy fishing with friends, and then I have memories with my family and my kids and my wife fishing. And for some reason, when I was trying to come up with like something to talk about on this story, those memories of fishing with my family just keep coming to the surface for me. And I don't have any like epic story to tell about them, but, just like my oldest son is really the one that kind of took fishing on and really, it's a big hobby for him. And so the experience of teaching him how to fish and fly fish and nowadays, he's a very mature 19-year-old now. And, he's still, every time he comes into town, every time we get together, that's one of the things that we always try to get together and do. And so, he's getting to be a pretty decent fly angler. And we've gone out a few times and he's caught some pretty darn nice trout. And I'll tell you what, nobody gets more excited about a big trout than Eli, my oldest son, does. So that, for some reason, even though it's not like an epic story, stuff like that sticks into my mind. There's another time where we went on a camping trip and decided to hike up a creek and had my youngest kids. I have 3 kids. And, at the time they're, early teenagers, I guess is what they were. And, my 2 youngest they like to fish, but they're a little bit reluctant. You got to drag them out. They always have fun when they go, but they're typical teenage kids that, like, oh, Dad, I don't know, it's kind of cold or whatever. so, we got them out there and, it just so happened the weather was perfect. The grayling were like on top eating flies and you could visually see them. And as you know, when you get like the visual plus the top water plus, being successful catching them. And so that was a pretty cool moment for me. And then probably the most recent one, my middle child, his name's Ty, probably the most reluctant of the fishers. For whatever reason this summer, it was like, Dad, I don't know. I've never caught a king. And I was like, well, a lot of people have never caught a king, but do you want to catch a king? We can try. It's not, it's not a guarantee, of course, but he was like all fired up about going all of a sudden. So went out on an afternoon in a private boat and with him and my wife. And got lucky. He got to catch a nice king and release it, and we have it on video. And so I don't know. There's something about those memories with my family that stand out to me. And
Yeah, for sure. And fishing is your family business. Um, right? Your dad was involved in a lodge in Alaska, correct?
yeah, that's right. And that's kind of how I got into fishing, I guess. But yeah, my dad owned a fishing lodge on the Kenai River in Soldotna, where I'm from, and then my uncle was also a guide on the Kenai River. I will say that I don't think any of them had the bug as bad as I do, but they definitely were the ones that led me down this path and got me going. And yeah, here I am in my 40s. Uh, still got the bug, still as sick with the fishing fever as ever, I guess.
Well, that's excellent. The Kenai is hollowed waters for salmon anglers. I think it still is holds the world record. Is that right?
Yes, sir. Yep. Record king salmon came, yeah, just a few miles downstream from where I live. And it still stands. And man, I don't know. I haven't seen any evidence that it's going to be broken anytime soon.
And it was a 97-pound fish. I read on your website.
Yeah, 97 pounds, four
Jeez.
ounces. Pretty cool. A local guy caught it, which, and the craziest part about that fish, if people, for people that are familiar with the Kenai River, have come here and fished, the peak timing to go fishing for king salmon and to have your best chance of catching a big king salmon is in July. There's fish that come in May and June, and occasionally some big fish, but July is really that target of, hey, I want to have my best chance of catching a big king. I'm going to come from July 10th to July 31st, and that's probably going to give you your best odds. The world record king salmon was caught on May 17th, which is, I mean, nowadays there's barely any fish in the river on May 17th. I mean, you go out there and almost some years it still looks half like winter out there. So to think of this like almost 100-pound king swimming up this little trickle of a Kenai River, before it's really started to fill up for the summer, in in early mid May. I mean, that part's crazy to anyone who knows the river and knows that story. That it's just unbelievable.
Well, and also the fact that the guy was geared up to land it, because if he was fishing that early, he may not even have been targeting kings, was he? Do you know the story or?
Well, he was targeting kings. The story goes, he was out there with a friend and just private. He's just a private angler that used to go before work a little bit, or he'd go after work sometimes. And I think this was a before work story. And yeah, hooked up. The name of the hole that he hooked it up in is called Honeymoon Cove, and I'm sure this fish drug him around all over the place. But tried to net it, and apparently the net wasn't big enough, or some people say that it broke through the net. I don't know for sure, but I could see how, especially in this is in the 80s, the equipment wasn't as as it hadn't come
Right.
along as far as it has now. So nets and rods and reels and line and all this stuff. I'm sure he was not working with the tools we're working with today. But the story goes that he couldn't net it, and so he ended up having to drag it up on the bank. And then after dragging it up on the bank, him and his buddy, I think they fished a little while longer. He threw it in the back of his pickup truck after they were done fishing, drove it into town, showed it off to some of his friends. He wasn't even going to get it weighed, and then somebody said, "Man, that could be the record. You might want to go have that weighed." And so I guess it had been several hours between the time when he caught it and when he actually had it weighed. So of course the rumors are all out there that this was a fish over 100 pounds if he would have brought it in right away. I don't know about that, but still a crazy story. And yeah, Les Anderson was the guy that caught that fish.
So I have never fished the Kenai. You have graciously invited Lauren and I up to come this summer, and we are super pumped.
Same.
Oh man, it's going to be awesome. I'm
Yeah,
already counting the
yeah.
days. um,
Yeah, we got a lot
for
of planning and we got a lot to talk about, but
Yeah, we
yeah,
do.
I'm excited too, man.
Cool. Well, thanks again. We are stoked. To somebody that's never seen it, never fished it, can you kind of describe the river and the fishery for us?
Yeah, for sure. So, I would say that it's not too much of a stretch to say that the Kenai River is the best salmon and trout river in the world that's on a road system. Now, of course, there's some fisheries off of the road system that you could say, trump the Kenai, but you have to fly in a little plane to get out in the middle of nowhere, and you know either pay a lot of money to stay in a fancy lodge or rough it or whatever. The Kenai is on the road system. You can fly into Anchorage and within a few hours be fishing on the Kenai, and that's what's pretty unique about it. Of course, it's what probably threatens the river as well, but it's what makes it such a cool destination for people. You can fly in a commercial jet in a few hours, be on the river, and have the Alaskan experience, without having to spend as much money as you would have to in one of those lodges out in Bristol Bay or something like that. The Kenai is a really unique kind of an aqua or emerald green color, which makes for really good pictures and really just attracts a lot of people to it. I think, you see it in photos and it's just like, wow, I got to see that. And when you see it, it's worth it, man. It's a really cool spot. Now, when I say it's a great fishery, it is a great fishery, but just like pretty much everywhere else in the Pacific Ocean right now, our king salmon are struggling. They're struggling bad, and it's really too bad because the king salmon, because the world record was caught here, because of the crazy unique genetics that we have on our king salmon, is probably what made this area famous. And so the fact that those fish are really struggling hard right now is a bummer for our community. It's a bummer for the culture here. But with that being said, I think it sometimes that king salmon fishery being on the downturn gives the Kenai River a bad rap, and it's people act like, oh, the Kenai is the downfall of the Kenai or whatever. It's really not. All the other runs, the sockeye run, the silver run, the pink salmon, the and then the rainbow trout fishery are all, as good as they've ever been. Of course, there's some years where things are a little better than others based on conditions on that year or whatever. But on average, we still have an epic fishery here, and we're very lucky to have it. So yeah, I'm excited to show it to you.
Yeah. So, what does the science kind of tell us in regards to the decline of the king salmon? Whereas, as you mentioned, the sockeyes and the pinks and some of the other species seem to be hanging in there.
Well, the first thing I'll say is that I can tell you my opinion or whatever, but
Sure.
there's not an agreement necessarily on the science right now. Um, Another misconception I think that you hear all the time is that there's something specific about the Kenai River that's wrong, which is the reason why the king salmon population is down. But logically, that doesn't make any sense, because if it was specific to the Kenai River, you would see strong runs on other rivers around the state right now, and you just don't see that. You don't see strong king salmon. No, I mean, even in where you're from, Oregon, right? So even
Yeah.
in Oregon, Washington, and some of those other rivers, pretty much every wild king salmon run across the Pacific Ocean right now is not doing great.
Right.
Um, so it's probably not something specific to the Kenai River. When people start trying to say, "Oh, there's too many fishermen," or "Oh, there's the trout are eating up all the king salmon eggs," or any of that kind of stuff, I kind of have to take a step back and say, hold on. If that were the case, why does the rivers in rural Alaska that barely any fishermen go to, or that there are virtually no trout in, why are they struggling as well? It's got to be something bigger. It's got to be something out there in the Gulf of Alaska at minimum, probably the whole Pacific Ocean. Um, a lot of people want to blame trawling, which there's some evidence that could be a big deal. Those guys that go out there and they're primarily fishing for pollock, but the bycatch on halibut, king salmon, crab, some of the other species that they're not quote unquote targeting is pretty massive, and a lot of people point to that. I heard you talking with Mark Hieronymus the other day on your podcast, and he mentioned the pink salmon populations. That's another another pretty strong theory. Uh, Pink salmon populations are the wild pink salmon population and the hatchery pink salmon population right now is booming, and that's a lot of fish. I mean, there's billions of them out there in the ocean, and they eat primarily the same food that king salmon eat. So that could have something to do with it.
Hmm.
I if you watch the show, what's the show that Jeremy Wade does? But uh,
The river monsters.
River Monster, yeah, he did a show on kind of checking out king salmon around Alaska, and he pointed towards orca whales and predation of orca whales. I'm not saying that's not possible, but I personally think it's probably a combination of all of those things mentioned and more. And of course, just simple ocean conditions. The warmer
Right.
water, all that kind of stuff. It's probably a combination of a lot of things. Um, so, but you can ask 10 guys and get 10 different answers, and they can all be really smart, scientific guys too.
Sure. Sure. So was Jeremy Wade suggesting that there were more orcas now than there used to be? Is that
I think he was suggesting there were more orcas, and the thing that's unique about orcas is that they're selective in what they eat. They prefer to eat the largest salmon. It's probably a calorie per effort ish thing. But they specifically target the largest salmon that they can find. And so, not only do we have less salmon, or less king salmon, I should say, um, the average size of the king salmon that we're seeing is shrinking. So that could explain some of that, I guess. But yeah, that was his theory.
is a 50 pounder a pretty rare fish these days, or what's kind of the average scale of kings that you're seeing on the Kenai?
Yeah, I mean, I'd still say that if a guy had a lifelong goal of catching a 50-pound king, the Kenai River is probably still the place that gives you as good as chances anywhere in the world. But 15 years ago, that I would have said 70-pounder. You know what I mean?
Wow. Okay.
And I think, or 60-pounder at least. There you'd see 60s and 70s occasionally. Now, don't get me wrong; these are still kings. They're not easy to catch. The big ones get off a lot. I mean, I think sometimes we like to, you get a lot of revisionist history and act like, oh yeah, we used to limit out on 70-pounders every day. No, 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 it was never like that. Catching kings on the Kenai has always been a something that can frustrate the best fishermen any day of the week. But yeah, the numbers are definitely down, and the average size is definitely down. We have the 5-year ocean fish. So, for people that don't know about king salmon life history, they're a little different than some of the other species in that there's a wide variety of ages that enter the river when they spawn. So some of them we call them jacks, 1 or 2 year ocean fish. So they spend a year or so in the river, get to be, 5, 6 inches long, and then go out to the ocean and grow and get big. If they come back in 1 or 2 years, they're little guys. Most of the fish that come back to the river are 3 and 4 year ocean fish, which put them in that, I don't know, 20 to 40 or so pound class. And then those 5-year ocean fish or bigger, 5, 6, there's rumors that I think the world record might have been a 7 or 8 year ocean fish, but those 5+ year ocean fish are the ones that make the Kenai River unique and make it, special from a genetic perspective. And those ones are less than 1% of the run now. So while they're
Ooh.
still out there, they're tougher and tougher to find. And whereas you maybe used to go fish your butt off and hope to catch a couple 70-pounders throughout the course of the season, now you do the same for a couple 50-pounders throughout the course of the season. And you do see an occasional rare, 70-pounder caught by somebody, somewhere, someplace, sometime throughout the season. But boy, there's not very many.
Few and far between.
Yeah.
So if you're going to target those kings with a fly rod,
Hmm.
how would you set up for that? I understand conditions, lots of variables, but
Yeah.
if a guy were going to go up there for 5 days and try to get a king, how would you suggest he fish for him?
Yeah, well, so the Kenai River is a pretty good sized river, and got a pretty pretty heavy flow to it. So fly fishing for kings is not an easy. It's hard enough to catch them with a big old wad of salmon eggs on there. So with the
Right.
fly rod, it's the ultimate challenge, but it's doable. I mean, there's a small group of guys that have got it down pretty good and can fish hard and long and catch a king or two. Um, on the Kenai. The best time to do it is earlier in the season before the river has gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. So, basically the first half of June, I would say, is probably the peak time to be able to have a chance to swing a king. And that's the way most guys are doing it, is with the big, 10 to 12 weight spay rod, a sink tip that matches the current they're fishing, and swinging it across and letting it hang. It's incredible how many, and this is true with, I'm sure you've done a little spay fishing, but trout are similar. You can let that fly hang for a long time sometimes, and when you think you've hung for too long, hang for 10 more seconds. And now maybe you've hung long enough. And it's crazy how many times that fly's just down there hanging, and you get bites on the straight hang, which is a very cool bite to get because it's a tight line. I mean, it's just, you feel it all, it's just a cool bite. But yeah, big, black, chartreuse, purple, articulated flies swung across the river. And I think what happens, and we don't get to see down, it's not clear water, so we don't get to see what's going on down there. But the way I envision it is those fish follow it across the run, hang behind it, think about it, and then grab on. And occasionally you get some fish that grab it across when it's coming across as well. But you catch a lot of them on the hang back. And yeah, it's for when you're undergunned, no matter what you do, fishing from the bank for a king on the Kenai, because like I said, heavy, fast water, deep water. Um, you're immobile for the most part, standing on the bank, so they have to cooperate a little bit. Because
Right.
yeah, if you hook a big one, 50-pounder or so, standing on the bank, and it wants to go downstream, you're not going to stop it. You just can't. They have to cooperate a bit. So, but yeah.
Yeah, I witnessed my buddy hook about a 50-pounder. We were on the Connect dock,
Oh yeah.
and this was a long time ago. I don't know, probably 2006 or something. I think I just moved to Montana, and then I went on this. I got invited on this trip, and it was a DIY trip. My buddies had jet sleds stashed up in that little village up there, Quinnahock,
Hmm.
and we flew a bush plane out there, and we camped on the beach, and it was just an awesome trip. um, I caught kings. I didn't hook one of the big ones. I wasn't set up properly. I had a spay rod, but it wasn't, I wasn't dialed. Those guys have done it a bunch.
Yeah.
They were dialed in. um, and yeah, one of my buddies was fishing this run, and he just hooked this massive silver beast. And I tell you, man, I have seen, I've seen big tarpon in the air. I've caught a really big GT myself. I've caught sailfish and marlin, and that fish was the hardest fighting fish I have ever witnessed in my life, and he had no chance of landing it. A 50-pound king in current, fresh from the ocean, might be the hardest fish to hang on to that there is.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know that they can swim as fast or as a marlin, or jump as high as a tarpon, but boy, the power they have, it just blows you away. How something underneath the water can pull as hard as they can pull. It's unbelievable.
Oh, it was so fun to watch. I mean, he was just, he was just completely screwed, and he knew it, and he was just laughing and enjoying the ride, and yeah, it was really cool experience. But that river is more approachable, from the swung fly standpoint, I think, than what I've heard your
Yeah.
stream is.
Yeah, we do have a few neighboring rivers here that are more friendly for swinging flies for kings. um, the Kasilof is the one that comes to mind first. It's just 15 miles down the road from the Kenai there from Soldotna in the town of Kasilof, and especially the early run of fish. You can be very successful swinging flies for kings over there. given the right conditions and the right timing and everything. But they're not going to be 50 pounders. They're going to be 15
50.
pounders, you know,
50's too much, man. That's like a 200-pound tarpon. It's too much.
yeah.
You mentioned my chat with Mark Hieronymus, and off the air, he's like, dude, if you're going up there, fish for rainbows hard. There are some huge rainbows in the Kenai, and I didn't really
Yeah.
know that. So could you tell me about the rainbow fishery?
Yeah, the story goes that the Kenai River really was a rainbow fishery before it was a salmon fishery, and that, like, when the Kenai River was discovered, it was primarily discovered, on the upper stretches, and rainbows were the first target fish, and uh, I think nowadays sometimes the salmon fishery overshadows the trout fishery, but our trout fishery, I mean, I've fished some awesome trout rivers. I've gone to Bristol Bay a couple times. I haven't fished all of them. I haven't hit the Neck yet, which is some people think is the mecca of trout fishing. But I've never seen trout fishing, when you're talking about numbers and average size of fish, any better anywhere in the world than I've seen on the Kenai when it's on. You can have days where where the boat, we fish, you can fish up to 4 guys out of the boats. We do that a lot as guides. It's a bit crowded, but you can do it because we're not having to make elaborate casts. We're primarily nymphing and, kind of floating with the drift. So you can make it work with 4 guys. And with 4 guys, you can have days when those fish are biting where you can easily catch over 100 trout.
Jeez.
And in the mix, there's some big fish mixed in. 30 inches is the target for, like, you just caught, that's what the 70-pound king, used to be.
Right.
30-inch trout is kind of that same, it's that measuring stick of, hey, I really, really caught something special, a once in a lifetime fish. And 30 inchers don't happen very often. There's a lot of 27 inchers that get caught that people call 30 inchers, but a true 30 incher is something to behold. But the Kenai has them, man. I've been lucky enough to put my hands and shake hands with a few 30-inch fish, and witness some guys do the same. They're amazing, but there's quite a few fish in that mid 20-inch range that you can have a very reasonable chance of catching. Those, some of them are 10 pounders. I mean, they're big rainbows, and I don't want to act like that's the average size, but because they come in, like I said, if you catch 100 fish, they're going to be all the way from 8 inchers to 28 inchers. But it's a cool fishery. It's a very cool fishery. We don't get the dry fly fishing quite like you guys get in Montana. There are some dry fly opportunities, but they're pretty short windows, and they're kind of nichey little deals. Primarily, we're long leaders, big indicators, beads, flesh flies. It's not purist fly fishing necessarily, but that's okay. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, if you got a shot at any fish in the mid 20s, is that's, most people will never see a rainbow like that. We don't have them around here. I mean, you're not going to catch a 25-inch rainbow around here in one of these rivers. If you do, it's news. There's
it's in the newspaper.
Yeah,
but we get
exactly.
so spoiled. We get so spoiled here. I'll never forget. I think of these things all the time, but I'll be in the boat and we'll have one of those days. And a lot of our guests, we get awesome people, a lot of beginner fishermen, and a lot of people that they don't really know how lucky they are sometimes, you know what I mean? And they're in the middle of one of those days that I'm just freaking out about, going, holy cow, I cannot believe you guys are crushing them. This is unbelievable. And they're catching, 22 incher, 24 incher, 25 incher, 21 incher. And then they hook an 18 incher and they're like, it's just a little one. And I'm just shaking my head going, come on, man. There was one trip this past fall, late in the fall, where the fishing just, everything clicked. We cracked the code that day. The fish were biting. Everything was right. And we were catching one of the best big fish trips I'd ever had. And, I think the guy hooked like a 22 and a half incher or something like that, and it's back there jumping around. And he called it a small. He said, "No, it's just a little one. Don't worry about it." And I was just I had to stop for a second and have a little chat with him. Like, hey,
Yeah.
let me tell you something real quick here. We go a lot of trips out here where that's the big fish of the day. So let's soak this in and appreciate it for what it is, because this you guys are having about as good a day as it'll ever be out here.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes you do need to remind people.
Yeah, yeah, in the right way, of course.
Yeah, of course. But yeah, when you know, I mean, relative to here, like you'll hear that kind of same thing when somebody catches like a 13 incher. And it's like, well, I mean, you caught a wild trout on a dry fly on a slow day. Uh,
For
I'd
sure.
take it. I'd
Yeah,
take it.
no doubt.
So, yeah. Mark, tell me about Fish for the Future.
Okay, yeah, Fish for the Future is it's an organization that I started. I was trying to remember. It's 6 or 7 years ago now, maybe. Um, and it was kind of in response to the downturn of the king salmon runs up here. Um, what I was seeing on the river was the fishery was changing, the number of fish was changing, the size of the fish was changing, but the anglers weren't changing. People were still going out there catching and keeping every fish that they could, every king salmon that they could, despite the fact that we're having historically low runs. And I'll never forget, I had a day out on the water where fishing was just absolutely brutal for 2 weeks straight. You know, we were fishing hard to catch maybe one or two a day, some days not catching them. Um, and then I had a day where I just got lucky, and all four of my clients caught nice big kings. They were all hens. I'll never forget. They were like, all of them were like 35 to 50 pound hens, which is a 50 pound hen is a really big female king salmon. We call them hens. So you probably knew that. Maybe some of the listeners didn't. Um,
Sure.
but I'm looking at them in the fish box, and on a normal day, I would have been high-fiving, I would have been grinning ear to ear, and I wasn't. I just felt icky about it. You know what I mean? Just that feeling of like, this doesn't feel right to me anymore. My gut was just telling me I can't do this anymore. And so from that day on, I didn't. Starting the very next season, my business went to a catch and release policy on king salmon. And, it took a little bit of time for people to embrace it, but for the most part, people did. They understood when you give them the kind of the background and you educate them on the fishery. People generally are, they're reasonable people, and they understand,
Right.
and they're happy with catching one, taking a picture for their memory, and letting it go, and giving it a chance to spawn, and moving on. And that I wasn't the first to do that, but I was one of the first, one of only a few people doing it on the Kenai, and so it drew some attention, and then I got interviewed about it by a newspaper one day, because they had heard somehow that I was doing that, and they were doing a story about the declining king run, and for whatever reason, to kind of hold myself accountable, I told them, hey, next year I'm gonna start a catch and release incentive program for king salmon, king salmon conservation program. And so that kind of made me do it. And it started with kind of a brainstorming with some buddies, and what it turned into was pretty simple, just a Facebook page with a catch and release photo contest. And back then, the regulations were generally, not always, but generally, you could still keep one king a day of any size. And so if someone caught a king, say they caught a 60-pounder, and they could, within regulation, harvest that fish, but they chose not to, we would celebrate that. They could post it on our Facebook page. They'd get lots of likes and comments, and virtual high fives, and then I got together with some local businesses and even some not local businesses, and got some prizes donated, and was able to give people prizes in different categories for for a selfless act of releasing a fish when they could have harvested it. Fast forward, and that went really well. Fast forward to the last few years, and the regulations have been off and on where you can keep them sometimes. Sometimes it's catch and release. Sometimes they close the fishery altogether. So the dynamics of the program have changed a little bit, but yeah, it was really embraced pretty good, and in a really controversial subject. I would say that the subject of catching and releasing king salmon on the Kenai River is about as
I can
controversial
imagine.
as you can get here in our community. It's getting less controversial now, but it was very controversial. So considering that, it was embraced really well. A lot of support. Very happy with it, with all that. So, and part of the reason for that, I think, is just the general message of some of the other organizations out there that are quote unquote, that represent sport fishermen. They would attack things like commercial fishing and say, "Oh, those commercial fishermen need to stop catching them." They would, it was more of a preachy thing rather than just a promote what you believe in type of thing. And I really made sure that we stayed on message. Like, we're not going to point fingers at anyone, even people that are keeping king salmon when they're under regulation can do so. I'm not going to criticize them. That's not my role here. My role here is to stay positive, and I want to make sure that we celebrate king salmon conservation. So we did things like promoting ethical handling of releasing kings, and we did some education in that way, and just a lot of celebrating the selfless act of letting a king go when you don't have to, and I think that kept some of the divisiveness out of it. So yeah, it's been really successful. Nowadays, there's a new group of people, some of them the same people that were anti-catch and release before, that think that you shouldn't even fish for them because there's just not enough of them to even catch and release anymore. Which, good. I'm not saying you should or shouldn't. I support that decision, but now those are the critics. So it's interesting to see how it's evolved over time. And like I said, I'm just trying to stay positive and continue celebrating any form of king salmon conservation at this time, because the river and the Pacific Ocean needs it.
Well, good for you, man. Oftentimes the public tends to point fingers at the guides too. And here's an example of you kind of setting the pace and kind of leading the charge for a newfound awareness of your fishery and of these fish that are just irreplaceable, and they're just an iconic part of the entire West Coast, but specifically Alaska and the Kenai River. So kudos to you, man. That's a really cool approach.
Yeah, appreciate it. It's been rewarding. I've enjoyed it, and I've had a lot of help too. I partnered with another guide. His name's Greg Brush, and he's done a ton of work helping me get to where we are now. So I want to make sure he gets some credit. Not that he needs the credit; he doesn't want the credit, but I would feel remiss not mentioning him here because he's done a lot of work as well. And between the two of us, we've gathered a bunch of sponsors. Even like national sponsors like Rapala, Willie Boats, which is the most popular aluminum drift boat and power boat up here. Reddington Drift Waders. There's this really cool business called the Fish Print Shop, which you haven't heard of him. You should check him out. A guy that's he does drawings of it's almost like the scientific drawings you would see in like a regulation booklet, but way cooler. And he draws them on these big, and they'll be like life size, so you send him the measurements, you send him a picture, and it does a drawing that you can frame. Super cool, but it's all about catch and release. It's called the Fish Print Shop. I think he's out of Illinois, but he gives
We'll
us
check that out.
some prints. Yeah. So the way I got to know that business was my wife is very into interior decorating. She really enjoys it, and
Nice.
but she does not enjoy dead animals on the wall. And so
Right.
So we don't have
Nor
any
do I.
we don't have any fish mounts or anything like that. But she really, really likes this guy's drawings, and so we do have a big king that I caught and released one time on the wall, drawn from the fish print shop. So yeah, it's a cool alternative to like a fiberglass mount or a skin mount, or some of the more traditional ways. So yeah, we gathered a bunch of sponsorships, so we have a lot of really cool prizes to give away, and there's categories like Lady Angler of the Year, Youth Angler of the Year. We have a video category, ethical release of the year, and then we have a new one called Conservationist of the Year, which is given to like not necessarily an angler, but a business that supports king salmon conservation. So yeah, man, it's evolved over the years. It's been really good.
Oh, that's fantastic, Mark. Good for you for leading that charge. Well, I mean, obviously, we got a lot of partners that you're working with on that, but that's the Fish for the Future program, and folks can learn more about that at fishforthefuture.com, right?
It's fishforthefuture.net.
.net.
Yep, all spelled out. FOR, fishforthefuture.net.
Cool. And then the best way for folks to learn more about your business, which is Fishology AK, is the same, to go to your website, I presume?
Yeah, there's a lot of information on the website at akfishology.com. Pretty active on social media, off and on both Facebook and Instagram. So check it out there. And of course, anytime folks want to learn more about this area, I'm happy to talk to them. So they can call or email me at akfishology@gmail.com.
Okay, AK Fishology. I had that backwards there. Okay, all right, Mark. Well, hey, man, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today, and we will be in touch. We're super pumped to come up and fish with you, and enjoy Florida, because now you're a part-timer. You're like the Costanzas, right? You're
something like that. I know people keep saying, "Oh,
Del Boca Vista." If you see another place for sale in Del Boca Vista, I'm coming down lock, stock, and barrel.
Yeah, come on down. I got a lot to figure out down here. I spent 40 winters or something like that in Alaska. This is my first time getting out of Alaska in the winter since Montana, and when I met you, actually. And so yeah, I'm excited. I got a lot to learn though down here. I'm just got a boat and starting to poke around and try to figure some things out. And the one thing that I know for sure is I think it's 75 and sunny today here, and back home in Soldotna I think it's -10 and not sunny. So I'm feeling pretty good about where I'm at right now.
Well, good on you. I'm going to go stack firewood in the freezing rain. So enjoy the day out on the boat.
Go to thefebruaryroom.com, where you can access a complete library of our podcast and read more about our guests, their fishing stories, and favorite fly patterns. We're always looking for exceptional fly fishing yarns, and if you have one to spin, shoot us an email at info@thefebruaryroom.com. The February Room is always free, but if you feel like throwing a nickel in the pond, we appreciate any additional listener support. For companies and individuals interested in sponsorship opportunities, please contact us for our media kit. Thanks for stopping by the February Room, and we'll see you down here next week.